Some field trips are supposed to be educational, safe, supervised. But when plans go wrong and you end up somewhere you were never supposed to be, you realize that some places remember their tragedies, and they're hungry to add more. It was October of my 8th grade year, and our class was supposed to visit the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. Nothing scary about that. But halfway through the 2-hour drive, our bus started making sounds that even I knew weren't normal. The driver pulled over in a town I'd never heard of, Millbrook, Massachusetts, population 1,200, according to a faded sign. Mrs. Chen, our teacher, made some calls while we stretched our legs in a gas station parking lot. 20 minutes later, she gathered us together with forced enthusiasm. "Change of plans," she announced. "There's a historical textile mill here that offers tours. We'll visit there instead while the bus gets fixed." We groaned, but followed her down Main Street toward a massive brick building that dominated the skyline. The Millbrook textile mill loomed at the end of the road like something from another era. 5 stories of red brick and broken windows. Rust stains ran down its walls like dried blood. A historical marker out front claimed it had been restored as a museum of industrial heritage in 1998. It didn't look restored. The front doors were modern glass, at least. Inside, the reception area was clean and normal visitor pamphlets, a small gift shop, fluorescent lights. But beyond the second set of doors, everything changed. The air turned cold immediately. Not autumn cold, winter cold. The kind that seeps through clothes and settles in your bones. Our tour guide introduced himself as Mr. Eldridge. He was elderly, maybe 70s, with watery blue eyes and skin like parchment. His voice was monotone, like he'd given this tour 1,000 times and lost all enthusiasm somewhere around tour 300. He wore a name tag that looked decades old. The Millbrook Textile Mill operated from 1891 to 1954, he began, leading us into the first production floor. At its peak, it employed over 800 workers. Many were children as young as 8 years old. The floor was massive, filled with dozens of ancient looms in various states of decay. Rust covered everything metal. The wooden floors were warped and stained. Windows high on the walls let in gray daylight that barely reached the floor. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust. Child labor was common in mills like this, Mr. Eldridge continued. The children's small hands were perfect for reaching into the machinery. Unfortunately, this led to numerous accidents. He stopped at one particular loom and pointed to the floor beneath it. I could see dark stains in the wood. In 1903, a girl named Sarah Wickham caught her hand in this loom. She bled to death before doctors could arrive. She was 9 years old. I felt my friend Jessica tense beside me. This was already creepier than any museum tour should be. Mr. Eldridge led us through 3 more floors, each one colder than the last. He pointed out accident sites with disturbing specificity. A stairwell where a supervisor fell or was pushed to his death. A storage room where 2 workers suffocated after being locked in during a fire drill that went wrong. A bathroom where a young girl drowned in a bucket under circumstances that were never fully explained. By the 4th floor, several of my classmates were whispering that they wanted to leave. Mrs. Chen looked uncomfortable too, but she kept insisting we stay for the educational value. That's when Jessica grabbed my arm hard enough to leave marks. "Look," she whispered, pointing at a grimy window across the room. I saw it, a small handprint, appearing slowly on the glass from the inside, but that was impossible. The window opened onto a sealed room. I could see through to the brick wall just 2 feet behind the glass. No one could be in there. Mr. Eldridge followed our gaze. His expression didn't change. He simply continued walking, pretending he hadn't seen anything. "The basement level housed the dyeing operation," he announced, leading us toward a narrow staircase. "This is where they treated the textiles with various chemicals, many toxic, many fatal if handled improperly. The temperature dropped at least 20 degrees as we descended. Our breath came out in visible clouds. The basement was a maze of pipes, vats, and industrial equipment so old it looked medieval. The ceiling was low, dripping with moisture. The air smelled like rust and something else, something organic and rotten. That's when we heard them. Whispers. They came from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the pipes. The language was strange, rhythmic, but incomprehensible. 3 students near the back of our group stopped walking entirely, their faces pale. "Do you hear that?" Emma asked Mrs. Chen. Our teacher nodded slowly. "It's probably just the pipes. Old buildings make all kinds of sounds." But Mr. Eldridge smiled for the first time. It wasn't a nice smile. "The children are very active today," he said quietly. "What children?" Mrs. Chen demanded. "The ones who never left." Before anyone could respond, Danny tried the door we'd entered through. It didn't budge. He pulled harder. Nothing. "It's locked," he said, voice rising. "It's locked from the outside." Mr. Eldridge's smile widened. "The children want you to stay for the full tour. They get lonely down here." Mrs. Chen immediately tried her phone. No signal. None of us had signal. She began pounding on the door, shouting for help. Several students started crying. "There are other ways out," Mr. Eldridge said calmly, "but you'll have to find them." Then he walked into the shadows between 2 massive vats and vanished. What happened next still doesn't make sense. Our group stayed together at first, following the basement corridors looking for exits. But the layout was wrong. We'd passed the same junction multiple times, even though we were walking straight. The corridors seemed to shift, presenting new passages we hadn't seen before. Eventually, we got separated into smaller groups. I ended up with Jessica and 3 others, following a narrow passage lit only by our phone flashlights. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. That's when I found the room. The door was partially open, revealing a space no bigger than a closet. Inside, arranged on wooden shelves, were dozens of small shoes. Children's shoes from different eras. Some looked like they were from the 1800s, others more recent. All were caked in something dark and crusted, something that looked like dried blood. My phone suddenly showed 7 missed calls from my mom, all from the last 10 minutes. But still, no signal to call out. Jessica pulled my arm. "We need to move. Now." We ran, following corridor after corridor. The whispers turned to soft laughter, children's laughter. But wrong somehow. Too high-pitched, too rhythmic. Behind us, we heard footsteps, small footsteps, running. I don't remember who found the window. One of the other students spotted it, a small opening near the ceiling of a storage room. We boosted each other up, breaking through old glass, cutting ourselves on the shards but not caring. We squeezed through into the gray afternoon light. We emerged on the side of the building, disoriented and bleeding. The other groups found different exits, windows, service doors that should have been locked, even a coal chute. It took us nearly 2 hours to escape that basement. 2 hours in a building we'd been told was a 1-hour tour. The bus was fixed. The driver was frantic, saying he'd been waiting for 3 hours and couldn't find us. Mrs. Chen was sobbing, makeup running down her face. Back at school, administrators called the Millbrook Historical Society. The response made everything worse. There was no tour scheduled that day. No one named Mr. Eldridge had ever worked there. In fact, the mill hadn't been open to the public since 2003. It had been condemned for 15 years due to structural instability and toxic chemical contamination. No one should have been inside. The building was empty when police investigated. No tour guide, no evidence anyone had been there except our footprints in the dust. The basement doors they found were rusted shut, hadn't been opened in decades according to the corrosion patterns. But we were down there. We were locked in there. Mrs. Chen took early retirement. 3 students transferred schools. I still have scars on my hands from the window glass. The mill still stands in Millbrook, Massachusetts, still condemned, still empty. But sometimes, late at night, people driving past report seeing small handprints appearing on the windows from the inside. And if you listen carefully, you can hear children's laughter echoing from the basement vents. They say the children are still waiting for the full tour to end. I never went on another field trip after that. Some places aren't museums, they're tombs, and the dead don't always appreciate visitors unless they're planning to add them to the permanent collection. We spend our lives thinking we know what's in the ocean, that science has mapped and cataloged every species, every depth, but some things were never meant to be caught, and some aquariums display more than marine life. My junior year marine biology class was the envy of the school. Mr. Holloway was young, passionate, and had connections everywhere. So when he announced that 15 of us had earned an overnight stay at the New Harbor Aquarium, we couldn't believe our luck. One night, sleeping beneath the main tank, surrounded by sharks and rays gliding overhead in illuminated water. It sounded magical. We arrived at 8 p.m. on a Friday in November. The aquarium, after hours, was completely different from the daytime chaos of screaming children and crowds. Just us, Mr. Holloway, and one other chaperone, Miss Reyes from the chemistry department. The staff gave us a private tour, showing us areas normally off-limits, the quarantine rooms where new arrivals were monitored, the medical bay where they treated sick animals, the massive filtration systems that kept millions of gallons of water clean. By 10 p.m., we were set up in the Ocean Realm Gallery, the aquarium's centerpiece. A 350,000-gallon tank stretched overhead, a curved tunnel of acrylic with water on 3 sides. Sand tiger sharks cruised past. A massive sea turtle drifted like a ghost. Rays flapped gracefully through artificial coral. We laid out our sleeping bags on the floor, surrounded by blue-green light that rippled across everything. It was beautiful, otherworldly. We stayed up talking, playing cards, taking photos. Around midnight, most people started falling asleep. I was almost gone when I heard it, or rather, when I noticed the absence of it. Silence. Complete silence. The filtration systems, which had been producing a constant low hum, were gone. No bubbling, no water movement. I opened my eyes. The main tank was still, not a single fish moving. The water looked frozen, like glass, and the emergency lighting had kicked on, bathing everything in red. I sat up. All 14 of my classmates were standing at the main viewing panel, their backs to me, completely motionless. They were arranged in a perfect line, like soldiers at attention, staring into the shark tank. "Guys?" I whispered. No response. No movement. I walked over to them, my heart already racing. When I reached the glass, I saw what they were looking at. A woman stood on the bottom of the tank, 50 feet down, staring back up at us. She wore an old-fashioned diving suit, the kind from the 1,930 seconds or 40 seconds, with a heavy brass helmet and canvas body. But the faceplate was cracked, spider-webbed with fractures, and growing from those cracks, pushing through the gaps, was seaweed. Dark, flowing seaweed that moved in water that wasn't moving. She shouldn't have been able to breathe. She shouldn't have been down there at all. Her eyes, what I could see through the damaged faceplate, were fixed on us with terrible intensity. One gloved hand slowly raised and pressed against the acrylic from her side. The glass flexed inward slightly, impossibly. I grabbed Jessica's shoulder, trying to shake her awake. She felt rigid, cold. Her eyes were open, but seeing nothing, or seeing something I couldn't. That's when I noticed Mr. Holloway. He was walking toward the staff door at the far end of the gallery, moving with the mechanical precision of a sleepwalker. Miss Reyes was still in her sleeping bag, unconscious or worse. I followed him. The door should have been locked, but it swung open at his touch. Beyond was a staircase I'd never seen during our tour. It descended steeply, concrete steps worn smooth in the centers, leading down beneath the tanks. The lighting down there was different older bulbs, some flickering, casting unstable shadows. The walls were older too, not the modern, clean construction of the aquarium above, but older brick and concrete that predated the current building. Mr. Holloway descended without hesitation, and I followed at a distance, terrified but unable to stop. The deeper we went, the wronger everything felt. The air was thick and damp, tasting of salt and decay. Water dripped from pipes overhead, and lining the walls were tanks I'd never heard of in any aquarium program. Small tanks, display tanks, but the things inside weren't fish. The first one I passed contained something pale and malformed, with too many appendages arranged in wrong configurations. The placard read, "Specimen 14A, recovered 1,923, depth 3,400 fathoms." The next held something that might have been a squid, but its tentacles ended in appendages that looked disturbingly like human hands. Specimen 22C, recovered 1,931, depth unknown. There were dozens of them, stretching down the corridor. Things that couldn't exist. Things that looked like evolution had taken wrong turns in the deepest trenches where light never reached. At the bottom, the stairs opened into a large chamber. It was partially flooded, ankle-deep in salt water that reflected the dim overhead lights. and at the far end was a tank bigger than all the others, 15 feet tall, filled with murky water. The woman in the diving suit stood inside it, pressed against the glass from within, her hands leaving prints in condensation that shouldn't have been there. Mr. Holloway stood in the water before her, reaching up toward the glass, whispering something I couldn't make out. "Sarah," he was saying. "Sarah, I finally came back. I finally found you again." The woman's hands pressed harder against the glass. Cracks began to spread from where she touched. I ran. I raced back up those stairs, my phone flashlight bouncing wildly, illuminating glimpses of those specimen tanks. At the top, I burst into the Ocean Realm Gallery and started shaking my classmates awake. One by one, they snapped out of their trances, confused and disoriented. "What happened?" Emma asked. "Why am I standing?" "We need to leave. Now." No one argued. We grabbed our stuff and ran for the main entrance. Miss Reyes finally woke up, groggy and confused. We pounded on the doors until security came. They found us huddled in the lobby, some of us crying, all of us terrified. Mr. Holloway was discovered 20 minutes later in a maintenance closet near the gift shop, unconscious. He had no memory of the night, no memory of descending those stairs. When he came to, he started crying and wouldn't stop. He resigned the next week and moved out of state immediately. The aquarium administration denied everything. No sublevels existed beneath the Ocean Realm Gallery. The building's blueprints showed no such construction. The stairs I'd seen weren't on any floor plan. Security footage from that night showed Mr. Holloway walking into the maintenance closet on his own and collapsing. Nothing else. No stairs. No descent. But I know what I saw. 2 months later, the aquarium closed an entire section for renovations. They removed tanks I'd never heard of and sealed off corridors that officially didn't exist. When it reopened, the Ocean Realm Gallery was slightly smaller. The floor plan had been altered. I never asked Mr. Holloway what he meant when he called the woman Sarah. I never found out who she was or how long she'd been down there. But sometimes I think about her pressing against that glass, seaweed growing from the cracks in her helmet, and I wonder how many other aquariums display things that were never meant to be caught. They say the ocean has only been 5% explored. But maybe there's a reason we haven't gone deeper. Maybe some things are better left in the dark, where no one can see them, where no one can catch them, where no one can put them on display. Living history museums are supposed to be educational. Actors in period costume demonstrating how people lived centuries ago. Harmless, safe. But what happens when the actors aren't acting? What happens when history refuses to stay in the past? Our 11th grade history class visited Millstone Pioneer Village on a Tuesday in late April. It was one of those outdoor museums where they reconstruct an entire 1800 settlement log cabins, a blacksmith shop, a one-room schoolhouse, all staffed by actors in period costume who stay in character and demonstrate pioneer life. We'd all been before on elementary school trips, so most of us weren't thrilled about returning. But Mr. Patterson had gotten us special access to some of the authentic buildings, original structures relocated from historical sites rather than reconstructions. For the first 2 hours, it was exactly as boring as we remembered. We watched a woman in a bonnet card wool, a blacksmith hammer out horseshoes, a schoolmarm give a lesson using a slate board. Some of my classmates were barely hiding their phones. Then the weather changed. The sky had been clear when we arrived, but around noon, storm clouds rolled in from nowhere. Within minutes, the temperature dropped 20 degrees. Rain began pouring down in sheets. Thunder cracked overhead. Our group, 6 of us, plus Mr. Patterson, got separated from the rest of the class as everyone scattered for shelter. We ran toward the nearest building, a log cabin at the edge of the village, with a sign out front. The Wickham Cabin original structure built 1847. We burst through the door, soaking wet and laughing, expecting to find it empty or maybe with one actor demonstrating hearth cooking or something. Instead, we found 4 people sitting at a wooden table, eating in complete silence. 2 men, 2 women, all in period clothing. They didn't look up when we entered, didn't acknowledge us at all, just continued eating from wooden bowls, their movements slow and synchronized. Sorry to interrupt," Mr. Patterson said. "We're just waiting out the storm." No response. They kept eating. I noticed their costumes immediately. They weren't like the clean, well-maintained outfits the other actors wore. These were genuinely old. The fabric was faded and stained, worn in ways that suggested years of use, not careful aging by a costume department. One of the men had a scar across his cheek that looked real, not makeup. The kind of scar that takes years to fade from raw red to pale silver. "Hello?" Danny said, louder. All four of them turned to look at us in perfect unison. Their faces were blank, expressionless, and then, simultaneously, they opened their mouths and screamed. Not words, just sound. High-pitched and anguished, and completely inhuman. The kind of sound that triggers every prey, instinct, evolution, programmed into your brain. We stumbled backward. Emma tried the door handle. It wouldn't move. "It's stuck!" she shouted over the screaming, which had risen to a volume that hurt my ears. The four settlers stood from the table, still moving in synchronization, and began acting out a scene. But it wasn't a demonstration of pioneer life. It was something else. Something horrible. The younger woman clutched at her stomach and doubled over, miming pain. The older man swung an invisible axe at something we couldn't see. The younger man fell to his knees, hands clawing at his throat as if choking. The older woman rocked back and forth, holding something wrapped in cloth, keening in grief. They were showing us deaths. Not explaining them, living them. "Mr. Patterson, what the hell is happening?" I whispered. Our teacher looked as terrified as we were. "I don't know. They're not supposed to be here. The cabin was closed for the season." The settlers continued their silent play. The younger woman collapsed, convulsing. The older man's swing with the invisible axe turned into him clutching his chest, face going purple as he mimed a heart attack or stroke. Death after death, acted out with disturbing realism. Then the older woman turned to us. The bundle she'd been rocking fell open. It was empty, just cloth. But she kept cradling it, kept rocking, tears streaming down her face. Real tears. She began to sing a lullaby in a language that wasn't quite English. Old English, maybe? Or something that predated it? The words were wrong. The melody, discordant and unsettling. The younger man picked up a knife from the table, a real knife, long and sharp, and began methodically sharpening it on a whetstone that appeared from nowhere. His eyes never left us. The sound of metal on stone filled the cabin. Scrape, scrape, scrape. The two men began to argue in that same strange language, their movements becoming more aggressive. The younger one slashed the knife through the air. The older one grabbed a fireplace poker. They circled each other like animals, while the women continued their miming of death and grief. "We need to get out," Mr. Patterson said, his voice shaking. "Now." We threw ourselves at the door together, all six of us, and finally it burst open. We fell out into the rain just as another school group was walking past, their teacher calling out a greeting. We turned back to the cabin. It was empty. Completely empty. No table, no people, no fireplace with a poker, just bare walls and dirt floor, with several velvet ropes blocking off the interior and signs reading, "Historical artifact, do not touch, closed for restoration." "Where did they go?" Emma whispered. Mr. Patterson was pale. I don't know." The other teacher looked confused. "Are you folks all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Did you see anyone in there?" I asked, pointing at the cabin. "In there?" "No. That building's been closed all week. Restoration work. No one's allowed inside." We checked our phones. Danny had been taking photos during the encounter. He pulled up his camera roll with shaking hands. The photos showed the cabin interior. They showed the six of us standing in an empty room, pressed against the far wall, staring at nothing. In every photo, the cabin was deserted. No table, no settlers, no food. Just us, looking terrified of empty space. Mr. Patterson reported the incident to the museum administration. They pulled records for the Wickham cabin. It had been moved to the site in 1976 from its original location in central Pennsylvania. The historical documentation was sparse, but what existed was disturbing. The Wickham family, parents, and 2 adult children had settled in the area in 1847. By 1849, all 4 were dead. The parents died of disease. The daughter died in childbirth, the infant stillborn. The son died in a logging accident. All within 18 months. The cabin had sat empty for decades before being donated to the museum. No actors had been scheduled for that building in over a year. The 4 people we saw didn't match any employee descriptions, and according to multiple staff members, the cabin had been locked from the outside, something we should have noticed but somehow didn't. The museum retired the cabin from display after our visit. Too many technical issues, they said. It sits behind the main village now, boarded up and off limits. But sometimes late-season visitors report seeing lights in its windows after dark, and if you stand close to the walls on quiet days, you can hear singing. A lullaby in a language no one speaks anymore. A woman's voice, forever mourning a child who never took a breath. History isn't always in the past. Sometimes it's trapped in the places where tragedy happened, playing out the same scenes over and over, waiting for an audience. And if you're unlucky enough to stumble into that theater, you might become part of the show. We think we know what's out there in space, planets and stars and empty vacuum. But what if something's been watching? What if something's been waiting for us to look back? I joined the astronomy club my senior year because I needed an extra credit and it seemed easy. Twice a month, we'd set up telescopes on the school roof, log some observations, and go home. No big deal. Then Professor Reeves announced the opportunity. He'd arranged special access to the university observatory for our club, all 8 of us, during the Leonid meteor shower in November. We'd have the entire facility from midnight to 6 a.m. Professional equipment, no light pollution, a night of real astronomy. We arrived at 11:30 p.m. The observatory sat alone on Wilson's Hill, 3 miles from campus, accessible only by a winding gravel road. It was a classic design white dome against the black sky, the telescope visible through the opened slit. Professor Reeves was unusually excited. He'd been an astronomer for 30 years, taught at the university for 15, and I'd never seen him like this, energetic, almost manic. He kept saying this was going to be a historic night. The first 2 hours were perfect. We took turns at the telescope, tracking celestial objects, logging coordinates, feeling like real scientists. The meteor shower was spectacular, bright streaks every few minutes, sometimes multiple at once. Sarah got emotional seeing Saturn's rings for the first time. Marcus spotted a binary star system. Even I had to admit it was pretty incredible. At 2:15 a.m., the power died. Not gradually, instantly. Every light, every screen, every humming motor, gone. The only illumination came from our phone flashlights and the stars above. Generator must have failed, Professor Reeves muttered. I'll check it. Keep logging observations manually. This is what astronomers did for centuries. He headed down the stairs to the generator room, leaving the 8 of us in darkness. We laughed nervously, made jokes about horror movies, and tried to stay calm. 10 minutes later, he returned. But something was wrong. His face was blank. Not concerned or frustrated, just empty. His eyes looked distant, unfocused. And when he spoke, his voice was flat and mechanical. I need everyone to look at something, he said. Through the telescope, one at a time. Did you fix the generator? Sarah asked. After. Look first. He'd manually adjusted the telescope while downstairs, pointing it at a section of sky nowhere near the meteor shower. Marcus went first, peered through the eyepiece, and went completely still for 30 seconds. What do you see? I asked. Just look when it's your turn. One by one, my classmates looked, and one by one, they came away silent and disturbed. When my turn came, I pressed my eye to the lens. At first, I saw stars. Normal, familiar stars. Then my eye adjusted to what was wrong with the image. There was a light that shouldn't have been there. Not a star, not a planet, something else. It was moving slowly, but perceptibly, crossing the field of view. And it was getting brighter. As I watched, I realized what I was seeing. A structure, geometric, vast. It eclipsed stars as it passed in front of them, revealing its shape through absence. And on its surface, something was moving. Things, plural, moving toward us? Toward Earth? I jerked back from the telescope, heart hammering. What is that? Professor Reeves smiled for the first time all night. It wasn't a nice smile. First contact, he said quietly. The signal has been calling this location for decades. I finally heard it last week. Tonight, they arrive. What signal? What are you talking about? He didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the white walls of the dome and began writing. Equations. Complex mathematical formulas in black marker, covering every available surface. Symbols I didn't recognize mixed with standard mathematical notation. 2 of my classmates, Emma and David, tried to leave. They ran down the stairs to the parking lot. Through the dome slit, I heard them trying to start their cars. Engines turned over but wouldn't catch, again and again. Our phones showed no signal. Not searching, not no service. The signal indicator was just gone, like the function had been deleted. But all of our screens showed the same thing, a symbol we didn't recognize, and beneath it, a countdown. 2 hours, 47 minutes and 33 seconds. 2 hours, 47 minutes and 32 seconds. 2 hours, 47 minutes and 31 seconds. 3 hours, Professor Reeves said calmly, still writing equations that spiraled across the walls. Then it arrives. We're lucky to witness this. Humanity has been searching for contact for so long. We never realized we just needed to look at the right coordinates to complete the signal. What signal? I shouted. He turned to me, and his eyes were completely black. Not pupils, dilated black, like someone had replaced them with polished stone. The invitation. Someone has to open the door. We barricaded ourselves in the control room, the 6 of us who hadn't looked through the telescope after my turn. Emma and David came back from the parking lot, pale and shaking. Through the small window, we could see Professor Reeves working with manic precision, adjusting the telescope's position degree by degree, checking his wall equations, making corrections. Through the dome slit, the light was visible now even without the telescope. A pulsing brightness that hurt to look at directly. It cast shadows that moved wrong, that bent at angles that defied geometry. The countdown continued. 1 hours, 23 minutes and 45 seconds. 1 hours, 23 minutes and 44 seconds. We need to stop him, Marcus said. Whatever he's doing, we need to. How? Sarah interrupted. He's not human anymore. Did you see his eyes? At 0 hours, 15 minutes, the light had grown massive. It filled a quarter of the visible sky, pulsing with a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. How was that possible? The thing was in space, and somehow it was synchronized with my pulse. Professor Reeves stood at the telescope, hands on the controls, adjusting it in tiny increments. The equations on the walls began to glow faintly, like they were absorbing the light from outside. At 0 hours, 5 minutes, I felt it. A pull, like something was reaching into my mind, trying to show me things. Images of vast spaces between stars. Shapes moving through darkness, intelligence that predated Earth, and something else, hunger. At 0 hours and 30 seconds, Professor Reeves threw his arms wide, face turned upward to the light, and screamed in a language that wasn't human. At 0 hours, the light vanished, instantly, completely, as if it had never existed. Professor Reeves collapsed to the floor, unconscious. The equations on the walls stopped glowing and became just marker scrawls again. Our phones suddenly showed normal displays 247 a.m., full signal, everything functioning normally. We called for help. Paramedics, campus security. They arrived within 20 minutes. Professor Reeves was alive but unresponsive. He woke up 2 days later in the hospital with no memory of that night. No memory of the light, the equations, or what he'd been trying to do. The university sent researchers to examine the equations. They photographed everything before cleaning the walls. 3 weeks later, I got called into a meeting with people who didn't introduce themselves but showed government credentials. They asked me questions for 3 hours. What exactly had I seen? What did the structure look like? What were the movements on its surface? Eventually, one of them showed me a photo, a page from a notebook, dated 1967. It showed equations identical to what Professor Reeves had written. The notebook had belonged to a radio astronomer working on a classified project called Sentinel. What was he working on? I asked. The man closed the folder. He was listening for signals from space, specific coordinates. In 1968, he claimed he'd received a response and attempted to complete the transmission. He was institutionalized, died in 1973. Whatever he heard drove him insane. And Professor Reeves received the same transmission, the same coordinates, the same invitation. The observatory was decommissioned immediately. Official reason: structural concerns and outdated equipment. The university built a new facility on the opposite side of campus. Professor Reeves never taught again. He took medical retirement and moved to Arizona. The last I heard, he spends his nights in his backyard, staring at the same section of sky with a small telescope, waiting. Sometimes, late at night, students still report seeing a light on Wilson's Hill, where the old observatory stands. A pulsing brightness that shouldn't be there. And if you stand at the base of the hill on very quiet nights, you can hear something. A humming that resonates in your chest, that matches your heartbeat, that sounds almost like it's calling you to come closer. Most students ignore it. But a few have walked up that hill. They're always found at the base of the closed observatory, unconscious, with no memory of what drew them there. And every single one wakes up knowing coordinates they shouldn't know, numbers that point to a section of space where nothing should exist. We send signals into space hoping for answers, but we never ask ourselves what might answer back, what might have been waiting, watching, preparing, what might have been invited in the moment we looked up and said, "Is anyone out there?" Because something is. And now it knows we're here. There are places where tragedy soaks into the earth so deeply it never leaves, where the dead don't rest, where the darkness isn't just absence of light, it's something alive, something hungry, and some places will do anything to keep you from leaving. Our college geology class took a field trip to Copper Ridge Mine in southern Colorado. It was supposed to be educational, a look at 19th century mining operations, mineral formations, industrial history. The mine had been converted into a tourist attraction in the 1,970 seconds, with paved walkways, modern lighting, and safety rails. Perfectly safe. That's what the brochure promised. There were 12 of us, plus Professor Wright, and our tour guide, a man in his 60s who introduced himself as Frank. He had the weathered look of someone who'd spent decades underground. Deep-set eyes, calloused hands, a voice that sounded like gravel. The first 200 feet were exactly what we expected. Clean, well-lit tunnels with informational plaques about mining techniques and geological formations. Frank pointed out veins of copper in the rock walls, explained how the ore was extracted and processed. Standard tour guide stuff. Then we reached a junction, and Frank paused. "What you've seen so far is the commercial route," he said. "But your professor arranged access to the authentic sections, the original tunnels where actual mining took place. It's not as pretty, not as comfortable, but it's real." We followed him past a chain barrier into passages that immediately felt different. The modern lighting ended. Our only illumination came from the helmet lamps they'd given us at the entrance. The paved floor became uneven rock. The walls pressed closer. The air changed colder, damper, tasting of minerals and something else, something organic and old. Frank's demeanor changed too. Less tour guide, more. Something else. He moved through the passages with the automatic familiarity of someone who'd walked these routes thousands of times. In the dark, without thinking. Copper Ridge operated from 1,872 to 1,954, he said, his voice echoing strangely in the narrow space. Peak employment was about 200 men, most of them immigrants, Irish, Italian, Polish. They worked 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week, for wages that barely fed their families. He stopped at an intersection where 3 tunnels converged. On the wall, someone had carved names and dates, dozens of them. The dates were all from 1,889. September 14th, 1,889, Frank continued. The deadliest day in Copper Ridge history. There was a collapse in Section 7. He pointed down the left tunnel. Killed 47 men instantly. Tons of rock fell. The company decided it was too dangerous and expensive to recover the bodies. They just sealed the section and kept mining elsewhere. He aimed his lamp at a newer-looking wall of concrete blocking the left tunnel. Modern construction, but old enough to be stained and cracked with age. That's where they're still buried. 47 men, entombed in the dark. As he spoke, we all heard it. A sound from behind that concrete wall, rhythmic, metallic, tap, 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 like someone tapping a pickaxe against stone. Frank's face went pale. In all my time in these tunnels, his voice cracked slightly. That's not supposed to happen. The tapping became pounding. Harder. More insistent. Dust and small fragments of concrete began to rain from cracks in the wall. We need to leave, Frank said quietly. Now. He turned back the way we'd come, moving quickly. We followed, our helmet lamps bouncing wildly, creating disorienting shadows. But after several minutes of walking, Frank stopped. We were back at the same intersection. The same carved names on the wall. The same concrete barrier, still shaking from impacts on the other side. That's not possible, Professor Wright said. We walked straight back. We tried again. Different tunnel this time. 5 minutes of walking. And we emerged at the same junction. Same names. Same wall. Same pounding that was now accompanied by voices muffled, speaking in languages I didn't understand, but the emotion was clear. Anger. Desperation. My classmate Emma's lamp illuminated a side passage none of us had noticed before. It was narrow, barely wide enough for one person, and descended at a steep angle. Every logical part of my brain screamed not to go down there. But I felt compelled. We all did. Like something was pulling at us, drawing us forward. Don't, Frank whispered. But he didn't stop us. Couldn't stop us. We entered the passage single file. The walls scraped our shoulders. The ceiling lowered until we had to crouch, then crawl. My helmet lamp showed only the person ahead of me and rough stone. Then the passage opened into a chamber. It was vast, far larger than should have existed in a mine this size. And it was full of equipment, old mining equipment, pickaxes, wheelbarrows, lanterns, all arranged as if work had just stopped, like the miners had set down their tools intending to return. And standing among the equipment, motionless in the shadows beyond our lamp's reach, were figures. Frank had said 47 men died. I counted at least that many shapes in the darkness. They stood perfectly still, but I could sense their attention on us. Their awareness. Frank? I whispered. What is this place? Our guide was shaking. This chamber isn't on any map. It shouldn't exist. The section that collapsed it was sealed completely. There's no access. One of the figures moved. Not walked, moved. It jerked forward in a way that violated biomechanics, like frames of film had been removed from its motion. In the brief illumination from someone's lamp, I saw its face. Collapsed. That's the only way to describe it. The flesh had fallen in on itself, like it had been underground too long. The eyes were hollows. The mouth hung open in a permanent expression of suffocation or screaming. Then all of them moved. They turned toward us in unison, and the sound the sound they made, not voices, not screams, something between stone grinding and air escaping from collapsed lungs, and they began to approach, their movements wrong and stuttering, pickaxes raised. Run, Frank screamed. We fled back through the narrow passage, scraping skin on rock, not caring, just moving. Behind us, the sound of tools striking stone echoed closer, always closer. The rhythmic pounding of pickaxes, dozens of them, mining through the darkness toward us. We burst out of the passage into the junction, and Frank grabbed the first tunnel he saw, running full speed. We followed, our group fragmenting in panic. I stayed with Frank and 3 others, racing through passages I didn't recognize, pursued by sounds that should have been impossible. Finally, we saw light, natural light. We ran toward it, emerging through an entrance I didn't remember using. We were outside, in daylight, gasping and crying. The mine entrance was a quarter-mile away, completely different from where we'd entered. Over the next hour, the rest of our group straggled out from different exits. Service tunnels, ventilation shafts, even a coal chute that had been sealed decades ago but somehow opened for Emma and 2 others. We'd been underground for nearly 4 hours. 4 hours in passages that were supposed to be a 90-minute tour. Emergency services arrived. Paramedics, mine safety officials. They wanted to search for anyone who might be lost or injured, but Frank refused to let anyone enter. It's not safe, he kept saying. It's never been safe. We just didn't know. When they finally did send a team in, they found the commercial route completely collapsed. Tons of rock and timber blocked the passages we'd supposedly walked through. No way we could have survived. No way we could have been down there at all. The authentic section we'd accessed? It didn't exist on any blueprints. The concrete wall Frank had shown us, sealing the 1,889 collapse? Mine safety records showed that section had been filled with rock and sealed from multiple access points. No one could have been standing in front of it. And the chamber full of equipment and figures? No large cavern existed anywhere in the Copper Ridge mine according to geological surveys. Frank quit that day, moved out of state within a week. He refused to talk about what happened, but I heard from someone who knew him that he'd had nightmares every night since. Nightmares of being trapped underground, digging through rock with broken hands, trying to reach the surface while his air slowly ran out. The mine was permanently sealed, every entrance, every shaft, every ventilation point filled with concrete and capped. The state declared it a hazard and banned all access. But hikers in the area still report hearing sounds. On quiet nights, when the wind is still, you can hear tapping echoing from sealed ventilation shafts. Rhythmic, persistent. The sound of pickaxes striking stone. The sound of men who've been mining in the dark for 135 years, trying to dig their way back to the light. Some people say the dead rest easy, but I know that's not true. Sometimes they don't rest at all. Sometimes they keep working, keep trying to escape, keep reaching for a surface they'll never see again. And if you get too close, if you descend into their darkness, they'll make sure you join them. Because misery doesn't love company, it demands it.